everyone here tonight. Thank you for this wonderful turnout. We didn't know what to expect tonight. I'm Kathy Creighton. I'm the Executive Director here at the Butler County Historical Society. I'd like to welcome you. Those of you that have never been here before, if you want to stay afterwards, we have the house open, we have our World War II exhibit open, and we have our Native American exhibit open in the basement. But tonight, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend, B.J. Miller, and he has been working on this program for a long time. He has grown up with antique cars his entire life, but from what I understand is you were supposed to have been an A boy and you switched to be a T boy. So he runs Ron's Machine Shop in Shandon that specializes in rebuilding antique engines, especially for T's and A's. And his father is part owner of the Salty Dog Museum in Shandon, which is an antique car museum. It's the only one in Butler County. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to BJ, and he will be talking about the Ford Motor Plant here in Hamilton.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Kathy. So, like Kathy said, I'm BJ Miller. We have our machine shop and museum there in Shandon. So if anybody wants to come and see us, just come on out. We have kind of odd hours at the museum, but at the machine shop, I'm there 8 to 5 all during the week, and some Saturdays. So I grew up in Model Ts and Model As my whole life, and we always went on Model T tours, and I got into history of the Model Ts and always liked that when I was growing up, and then found out there was a tractor plant in Hamilton and always wanted to know more about it. So this year we did a lot of research. I found out that one of the buildings was still there, which I had always heard that it was all gone. So we started doing lots of investigation and trying to put all the stories we heard, try to put them all together, and this is what we wound up with. So we've had a lot of interest in it, so we made it into a PowerPoint and just did it to learn about the area and learn about the Ford plant in Hamilton. That's a picture of it right there from an old postcard when it had first opened. So the Fords and Tractors is what the Ford plant was originally built for. So Fords and Tractors began in 1917, and they were selling one of the best selling tractors in the country at the time. A new one was $750, which that's a lot of money. Most of the assembly was at River Rouge, but Henry Ford came from a farming community, and he always pushed farming anyhow. So he was really excited to push the Fordson tractor and put them in full production. They planned on building 5 of these new Fordson factories. Hamilton was going to be the largest. And Hamilton was also going to serve everywhere to the south as well. Why did he pick Hamilton? There's a lot of reasons that I found out. Henry was from Detroit area up in Michigan, so we always tried to figure out what brought him down here. So one of them was the Miami Conservancy, which is actually still in existence. It was formed after the 13th flood, when everything flooded all down the river, and they spent, the newspapers from back then said they spent $20 million after the 13th flood. So this was probably in about 17 or 18. They were spending $20 million of money that time. And Henry said if a community will spend that much money on their area, they've got something really down there that they all want to protect and they want to progress. That was the largest public works project in the world at the time. So the Miami Conservancy on their website, I think the final cost turned out to be $30 million by the time they were done. So part of that was flood control. That was the main reason of the Conservancy. And there was called a little reservoir, which was where the Ford plant was built. So that was filled in, and the Ford plant was built. And they owned all that land as well. The other reason to build in Hamilton was the Hamilton-Rossville hydraulic, which was applied by the Great Miami River. Now we'll all fall asleep. It was supplied by the Great Miami River. It was privately built in the 1840s. This was a massive project for privately done, and that's a whole nother story we could get into. I don't know all the history of that, but I think one of these days there might be some more information on that. But it was built for flour mills, paper mills, machine shops to use all through Hamilton, and it ran underneath the city streets, and the different factories could use the water, hydraulic power. So the first business was a flour mill in 1845, and it was on this side of the High Street Bridge, right at the corner of the river. That was the first company to use it. Champion Paper used it, and lots of machine shops around. And it was all built there to bring more business into Hamilton. So once Henry got it, or moved into Hamilton, he bought the entire canal, the hydraulic, and everybody called it the Ford Canal. They actually changed the direction of it, or the different runoffs, legs of it, and it didn't run under all of the city like it had before. So it ran mainly to the Ford plant, but other companies still used it. So there's a good map. You can see this is the river going there. They built a dam right here, which is, if you go in Wrenchler Forest, you can ride back there to see the dam. And then right here is the canal. And then there's another dam right here to divert the water down. So this is a picture of the upper dam. And if you ever get a chance to go out there, it's really cool. Big horseshoe dam. Now this is taken out on an island, out in this island out here. And the YMCA used to have camps out there, Boy Scouts would go out there. Used to be a lot of activities there. Now this is the lower dam. We had a Model T tour here in 2012, and we all drove across. So we got to drive across the river, basically. And that's going out to that island. Here's another picture of the dam, and that's my daughter Lizzie. So the head gates is right there where we were crossing the river there. That's where the head gates are. You can actually, when the gates open, you can drive across there. They have it closed in those cases now. But the Bonham family owns this area, or used to, I think they still do. And they said that you could still see the Ford painting on the side of it. There's a picture of it back in 2012. This is our drive along the canal. This is now the bike trail. So, another reason they came to Hamilton. Hooven-Owens Rentschler was in Hamilton. Hooven-Owens Rentschler was right down the road here. They were a huge company. They built a lot of the big industrial engines. They built the Corliss engine, which was a steam engine, but they had also built the power generators for Highland Park at Dearborn in Detroit for the Ford factory. So I believe there was 12 of them, came out of Hamilton, was shipped all the way to Michigan to power the Highland Park plant. W.B. Mayo who Henry Ford dealt with at Hooven Owens Rentschler. Ford really liked Mayo, and he stole him to work for Ford. And his job was to set up new factories. So he was one of the leaders in the Rouge plant, and they got along real well. So Mayo, I'm sure, said, how about look at Hamilton? Also, Hooven Owens Rentschler was already making Fordson parts. So they were making the heavy transmission, rear end parts, and castings and stuff. So another reason they liked Hamilton was because the railroad, and they could ship rail cars to Detroit or other assembly plants in the country. Here's a picture of the Hooven Owens Rentschler building. Enormous building.
Where was it?
Where was it?
Yeah.
Right down at the end of this 2nd Street here. You
It's
run right
still
into
there.
it. So 2nd Street, come in right there, and this would be 3rd, I believe.
Oh, good.
5th. Yeah, it's now Cohen Recycling.
No. Just Black Clausen.
Here's a picture of the power generators that they had installed up in Michigan. And if you see the plate down there, now this building is all gone, where that Highland Park. That building's all gone, but they scrapped all the generators except for one, and that generator is still in the Henry Ford Museum. And you can go up and see it. It's engine number 12, made in Hamilton, Hooven Owens Rentschler. That was a 6,000 horsepower engine. Now they had 12 or 14 of these engines powering that plant. Now, here's a map, just a Google map. Right here is where the Ford plant was. So here's your canal coming in. There's the Great Miami River. Here's Hooven Owens Rentschler. Right here's the power plant that's right there. Ford plant is right there still. So it's all grassy area at the moment, except for the one building, which is still there. Well, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. So Henry Ford and Son Incorporated is who purchased the hydraulic. Henry Ford and Son got shortened later on to be Fordson Tractor. They bought the area. They also liked the area because of all the farms. And Henry was president. Etzel was the vice president. And in July of 1918, it was publicly announced in all the newspapers that the Ford tractor plant was to be built. So here's when they purchased. This is their deeds. Henry bought 585 shares, $29,250. Etzel got one. $50. Yeah, that's pretty good. Etzel's vice president. He later became president of Ford Motor Company and the hydraulic. He still probably had the one share of.
Just a little more. We can't see it. Yes, we can now.
Here's where they
Well,
had it
some
in the
you can.
newspaper.
We have people
$1
watching.
Million farm
You
tractor
can.
plant.
6 people watching it live so far. Yeah.
There's Henry. Fordson tractor. So Henry started building the factory. They're gathering up land and started building. They're running ads in the paper. They're paying $5 a day, 1920, that was good money for them. They pretty much held that price for quite a while. You can go see Mr. Smith on 2nd Street across from the YMCA. He's right down the road. So building the factory, they pretty much bought up a lot of the farms in the area, and 1918, 19, and 20, they were building for the most part, buying and building. They were drawing up plans, changing the plans. They were planning on keeping the farms active farms. The original plans were that the farmers in the wintertime would work at the Ford plant, and they would go back to farming during the summer. I don't know if that worked out real well for them, but they didn't seem to carry that theory on after they began operations. But a lot of the big concern was, where is everybody going to live? A lot of people are moving into Hamilton, and there was already multiple families living in single family homes, and that was a big concern back then. And another big part of the power, or the factory, was its own power plant. Hamilton had a power plant, but it was not enough to supply the entire city. So, housing crisis, and that's how we wound up with Fordson Heights, which is right up the road from the factory. Fordson Heights was a subdivision. It was built at the north end of Hamilton. It was mainly for the Ford workers. They needed a place close to work, and they needed nice homes. They could walk to work, and it was built to support the growth that Hamilton would receive just by having the factory. And like I said, many families had to live together in a single family home. So this was how Ford answered that issue. And they did build nice houses. I have a lot of newspaper clippings on different features of the houses, the different colors paint, the floorings. They put a lot of effort into the homes. So Henry was helping plan the solution for that. There's some pictures out of the newspapers. There's probably a lot of these homes still there. These are little Model T garages. That's about all that fits in them. So right here's Fordson Heights. Here's the canal. Right there is where the Ford plant was. There was also a Highland Park, which we were invited to this year, back in the spring. It was their 100th anniversary. Highland Park in Hamilton is named after Highland Park, Michigan. So Highland Park in Hamilton is, I never could find any documentation saying it, but the executives lived over there. That's pretty much why it was developed over there. So the houses are bigger, the yards are bigger, houses are nice, and it's still a very nice neighborhood. Here was the original plan for the factory. Now we found this. This is actually on the internet, but you can't read any of it. It looks like it's drawn on a napkin, so we actually wrote up to Henry Ford Museum. We went to the library and asked if we could see the little scrap of paper that's on, and they brought out a 3x5 poster, and we had no idea. But it's very interesting. This is a vegetable garden. This is the main building. This is the proposed building. The play field, and then there's a boiler room and a couple other buildings there. But their original plan changed a lot. I got a kick out of the vegetable gardening. So that was mainly there to work tractors. Here is a picture of Alfred and Bertha Fritchie, I think that's how you pronounce it. He was an architect for the Ford plant. That's their two kids. in the night watchman. He's kind of hard to find. So, that's what it looked like after it was all completed. So this is when it was just finishing up. Henry Ford had his name wrote in the front steps, is what we've heard. All of that's gone. So we tried to find it. There's another postcard. We got some Maltese out front. So here's the main building. This is the way the factory turned out. So the main building, the boiler house, and the paint building. So that was drawn on the napkin. This is where your play field was on the big poster, which is ball fields now. I'm pretty sure that always was.
Where was the Chem 9 plant compared to that?
What's
Chem
that?
9. Where was the Chem 9 dump area compared to
This
that?
building. I'll get into all the Chemdyne, but yeah, Chemdyne, it took over the entire building and all the way around it.
And all the lot around it, yeah.
Yeah, I got lots of pictures of that. So here's a parking area. Now, if you drive past it, you can still see a lot of this. So here's the parking area. You can see where it was fenced off and where all the road is. This building is still there. That was built by Ford. I'll get into that. But here's the main building. Coal, Spider. I'll tell you what the Spider's building are. Radius rods, maintenance, boiler house. So that was a 1948 design.
How many people did they employ?
I'll get to that. There's some more pictures of, these are a little bit later pictures. You can see all the rail lines coming in. This is a power plant, which was at the end of the factory on the canal. The factory was made out of steel and brick, had huge windows for natural light. It was completely hydro powered, and they had lots of room for expansion. There's another generator. But it's a little hard to see. Here's the Ford factory, the main building. Over there's the river, and the power plant is over there as well. Here's the guardhouse. When Henry would come to town, that was his first stop. He came unannounced, ran in the guardhouse, ripped the phone off the wall, and then he went in. That way nobody knew he was coming.
Wow.
Yeah, he was always looking to see who was messing around and not working and if they were wasting anything.
He also broke all the windows out of that guard shack once too.
Did he?
Yes, he did.
More pictures. Okay, so here's the spillway. The Ford factory's there. This is the generator room. The Ford script and concrete on the sides there. That's what it looked like then. That's what it looks like now. But you can still see it's the same foundation. There's the three windows. You see, there's the three windows. Just the top, they removed the building. This is the backside, so the water's coming into the foundation there. There you can see the Ford. Okay, so here's the Ford plant. Here's Hooven Owens Wrenchler. There's the bridge right there, and Champion. Also had an airport This was before the Hamilton Airport. This was the Ford Airport. It was to the north. We don't know if the arrows was painted on the roof or put on the picture. We never could find an answer to that. Either way, they could figure out where the airport was out there. Here's one of the Ford Tri-Motors when it had arrived. Mr. Fritchie is one of them. These are all the Hamilton people that helped get the Ford plant going here. Some of them are executives from Firestone, some of them are from Ford, and then some of them are from Hamilton. Jack Andrews is the tall one on the end. The two Firestone reps. Gene Wellburn, Robert Klaus was a retired funeral director of Hamilton. Frank Schwab, Mr. Frichting, which I showed you as a builder, the architect, and Andrew Wirtz. There's a big picture of him in front of Tri-Motor. That was here at their airport. So Henry became the largest landowner in Butler County. So he owned 1,200 acres. He was planning, he had big plans. He was ready for them, but they never fully took off. But he had everything here. He had the factory, the farms, airport, the hydraulic for power. He had recreation, he had plenty of room for expansion, so he had Hamilton set. He had planned on building a rouge plant in Hamilton, which is what it's on River Rouge up in Dearborn. It's a 16 million square foot factory. So that almost was built in Hamilton. He was ready to start on it, but it never progressed. They used rail and river for shipping. They dredged out the river, used barges. So a lot of raw material would come in one end of that factory, and cars would drive out the other end. He liked that because he had 100% control of the product. Here in Hamilton, the first unit was finally made May 13th, 1920. So from 1918 to May 13th of 20 is when they were setting up to build tractor parts. It was a Fordson transmission. They were making 100 of them a day, planned to make 400 a day. Parts were made and heat treated and assembled in Hamilton. And then the transmission units were shipped to Dearborn and other assembly plants for the Fordsons. They were, at this time, had 400 men employed. As of March 1921, they were supplying all the transmissions for the Fordsons for the River Rouge plant, St. Louis, and Des Moines, Iowa. Making 200 a day, and they also were making the rear axle assembly. So all these heavy parts. You could order your new Fordson now. Right at the other end of 2nd Street here is where the new location is. They were down here on Main Street at this time at Miami Motors. And they were right as you cross the bridge to the west side of Hamilton, which is now part of the bridge and the road. A lot of this all left during flooding and when they redid the river. So their second building, built in 1920, is on 2nd Street, which is Miami Motors. You can still see the Miami Motors at the top. There's a picture of it back in the winter. I think somebody said it's going to be an indoor farm. So Henry and Edsel came to that building, and they were quite impressed. Edsel was very impressed with it, and this newspaper article explaining how impressed Hetzel was, and it was one of the state-of-the-art dealerships in the whole country that he'd ever visited. So they were very impressed. Got to spend time in Hamilton and visit with the owners, and they, I'm sure, was treated very well while they were here and shown around. So shortly after that, tractor production ended in Hamilton. Farm equipment started not selling as good. Everybody could buy a car. It was a lot cheaper. They could drive to a job instead of work on a farm. March 1921, 75% of the transmission and rear axle parts were made in Hamilton. So they had factory going pretty good, but they never got it up to what they wanted. They wanted it to be a full assembly tractor plant where tractors could come out the other end and be shipped. So it never got to what it was supposed to be. They tore everything down, shipped it all to Detroit and other factories, and decided they needed more wooden wheels. So they quit in October they quit making quartz and tractor parts. They brought engineers from Dearborn down, and they decided to take their time and make Hamilton a wooden wheel factory, the most efficient one they could ever build, and that's what they did. They took ideas, they built the machinery, they tested it, and improved it, and tested it some more, and one big help for them was the dry kiln. It was taking weeks to months beforehand to dry the spokes. They brought it down to 4 to 8 days. And moisture is 4% in the wood, and they used hickory. They're made out of they have to be a hardwood, but oak is too hard. So they made all the wheel parts there, the steel felloes, and the wood spokes and the hubs. The first wooden wheel to leave Hamilton was January of 1922. Here's some pictures of them. This is in the Hamilton plant with all the wooden wheels, stacks of them. There's belts, chains. So they're all finished here as well, assembled and finished. Here's a picture. This is the Ford plant in Hamilton. The wheels would just roll right out and go right into a rail car. This is the only picture that the Library of Congress has of the Hamilton Ford plant. This is 1922. There's ice and snow all over. In 1924, they're making 1,500 wooden wheels per day. So that's pretty good. They're also making a lot of other parts. They have 1,900 employees at this point. They're making running boards. So I hope you guys got time to come early and look around. You can look afterwards as well. But made running boards, rear radius rods, tire carriers, battery brackets, one of them back here, fuel tanks, license plate brackets, door locks. Now when they say a door lock, that's the little latch, just the standard door latch for the open and closed cars. A lot of truck parts, hubs, brake drums. So they were making a ton of parts at this point. June 10th, 1925, the 7 millionth wheel was produced, which would have been a wooden wheel. $1925, they're making 7,000 Model Ts are being produced every day. The parts that were made in Hamilton was 100% of that production was made in Hamilton. So they were making enough parts for 7,000 Model Ts a day in Hamilton. 2,400 men employed, running 2 shifts, 336,000 parts a day. there's some pretty good numbers there. 28,000 open door locks, 7,000 spare tire carriers. The 28,000 dash brackets, which we have. I have a lot of the parts that are listed here are around the room here.
Quick question, BJ.
Yeah.
Were all these parts being cast and molded here in Hamilton?
Some were cast, and most of the parts they made here were stamped. Stamped and rolled. 153,000 spokes per day are handled, which is 1.5 rail cars. So everything was by cars back then, but that meant rail cars. So 1.5 rail cars of spokes went through every day. They used 1,000 to 1,500 gallons of fuel oil every day for heat treating and forgings, delivered by rail. They had a cafeteria, which was supposed to be one of the best in Hamilton. Served 3 meals a day, the largest cafeteria in Hamilton. It was on wheels and was pulled by a tractor through the plant. So you can tell the idea behind that. You didn't leave your machine very far. Just keep working, we'll feed you. So, parts are made from the leftovers, so if they stamped drum out and had a little piece left over, then something little was made out of that little piece. So they tried to use as much scrap as they could, and that saved them thousands or millions over the years. At this point, they had 2,500 employees. They were set for up to 4,000 was what they expected to be their top number. At 1925, they were supposed to be the exclusive supplier for balloon-tired wheels. So they made, that would have been 21 inch. It was the balloon tire was a softer ride, so you could get that on wood or wire wheel. The cheaper cars had a smaller tire, well, a different size tire. June 1926, the 10 millionth wooden wheel was made. 1929, okay, so they switched to wire wheels in 26. They were still making the wood ones as well. 1927, they would have ended the wooden wheels. Model A's all have wire wheels. So in 1929, they're making Model A wheels. They made 5 million wire wheels. Making 28,000 wheels a day, 3,700 employees. So they're pretty much at capacity. 1931, 13 million wire wheel. Plus, on top of all that, at the same time, they're making running boards, headlight brackets, fenders. They're making a ton of stuff. Here's a picture of the blue wheel that's over here on the table. If you look at the back side of it, it's got ham stamped in it. They didn't mark all their parts, but they did have it on some of them.
Did production slow down during the Depression?
Yes. Yeah, they did slow down. They had been up to $7 a day, and once in 1929 they laid off a lot of people, and they lowered the rate back to $5 a day. That was the minimum wage. So, and it didn't go back up until I forget when it was, but it took a while to bring it back up. There's a picture from Hamilton of the pull rod department, so the handbrake, emergency brake rods. Now this is where 100% of production was made in Hamilton, these parts. There's Model A wheels. These are the Model T, AOT. They were hanging here. They would have been cleaned, sandblasted, and primed and painted. Yeah, this is the wire wheels. And it's either the 26 or 7 or 28 and 9 Model A. They're real similar. There's some brake rods hanging there. I think those are in the back cabinet back there. Brake rods were a pretty large portion of their business. I have lots of pictures of them. This shows all the different machinery. This is the grinders. They're all laid out here, going down the line, getting ground. Probably putting the threads on there. Here you can see how huge this building was. This was the little building. It was off to the side. This is a butt welder for the brake rods. And still, that's the small building. Now here's one of the wheel assembly. You can see a Model A wheel. They'd spin around there. I believe they were getting welded. They were either getting welded or sandblasted. There's one of the wheels. This one's being put together. So that's a 32, 30, somewhere in there. Here's Model A brake drum. So that's an entirely stamped part. So that's where they're being assembled. You got your hub, your drum, and your lug bolts. And then the bearings pressed in too. Again, this is the small building, all the different stations set up. Most of this is all set up just to do brake rods. There's all of them hanging there. This is what they made, 28,000 of them, I believe, or 14,000 of them a day. So this is a later picture. We got steel wheels here, so this is more towards the end of their time. 40s. This is one of the last parts they made. It was a coil spring. So they didn't start using the coil springs until, I think, 49 or 50. Yes?
How hot and noisy would it have been inside? It looks really nice.
Yeah. Everybody wore long pants anyhow. It must have been warm. They all had their short sleeves and their sleeves rolled up. I imagine it got hot in there. They have the huge windows. They tried to have it well ventilated. That also makes it cold in the winter. So I don't know how wonderful the conditions would have been, but it should have been bright with the big windows anyhow. So when World War II came along, they were making the B-24 engines for that plane. So they quit production of the car parts, and they were making B-24 engines and sending that to a Willow Run up in Michigan. Willow Run is where Rosie the Riveter is famous for working. And at this time, they also built a new building at the Ford plant here, and that's the only one that's still there today. They kept that building for during the wartime, and then pretty much after the war, they sold it off. So I guess they really didn't have a use for it. And that did not go to turn into Chemdyne, and that building is still there. So the Ford plant closed in 1950. Everything got moved to Monroe, Michigan, which is now closed. A lot of employees either went to Sharonville, Batavia, or were offered to transfer to Monroe. And there may be some of you guys.
Fairfax.
Fairfax, yeah.
Batavia came in the 80s.
Oh,
And Sharonville didn't start until 1958.
58.
They
Okay.
went to Fairfax when they took it.
Fairfax. Okay.
And then they transferred over.
Okay. The plant was listed for sale in 1950 for $1 million. Ford rejected the city's bid of $400,000. Champion was supposed to have bought it, but it didn't ever go through. And Hamilton then offered 600,000, and they said no. But in 51, Bendix Aviation bought the plant. They were drawn to because of the power plant. That was one of the big draws, and the enormous size of the building. Bendix built Oldsmobile parts. They built a lot of brake parts for all types of cars: Oldsmobile, Pontiac, Ford, Hudson, Nash, Crossley, Willys. They also made aviation parts, fuel metering systems, water regulators, and a whole bunch of little parts as well. They closed in 1962. So there's the same building, same Ford plant, now Bendix. Then Ward Manufacturing moved in. They bought it in 1963 and produced Nimrod camping trailers until 74. The oil embargo of 73 raised fuel prices, people quit camping and quit buying campers. So that's pretty well rough on them. They went out of business at that point. So this is the beginning of the end. Spraydine purchased the factory from Ward in 1974. Spraydine originally started in the Fernald, the town of Fernald area. They manufactured aerosols, chemicals, and solvent recovery. So in other words, they took waste chemicals and found out other uses for them, bottled them, and sold them for that. They also gathered a lot of other chemicals and ran out of room to set them around. So that when they bought the Ford plant, that's mainly what they used. 1975, they began producing antifreeze from recycled chemicals. So that's how they were recycling it, just selling it. 76, they changed their name to Chemdyne. They occupied the property in 1975. It was a hazardous waste processing company, and most of their stuff was stored in barrels outside. And they also had other locations that they stored down in Louisville and all around Westchester. So they dumped a lot of chemicals over the years. 30,000 drums of waste, 300 gallons of bulk waste left there in 1980. They did have a couple fires there. There was 5 fish kills in the Great Miami River that they attributed to leaking chemicals, and one of them went for 37 miles downriver. Cleanup, it was #1 chemical disaster in the state of Ohio and #2 in the USA. So this was a huge mess. Federal cleanup cost $22 million. The cleanup was considered done in 1992, but it is still under review, or they have a review every 5 years, so it's still on the national priorities list. Next review is next year. According to their website, they say that they think it will be completed by 2021. I don't think so, but that's what their website says. Now here's a picture of the big fire. You can see the smokestack now says Ward on it. See all the barrels just stacked in the front of the Ford plant. So the firemen, we've heard lots of stories. The firemen said that their hoses would rot in 2 of their water mixing with the chemicals, and the hoses laying in the chemical water mixture, and the hoses were disintegrating as they were using them. So this was a big mess. Some more pictures. No, no. Is that you over there?
Yeah, I was there.
Were you there?
Yeah, during the fire.
Okay. We knew a phone man that worked on all the phone lines, and he said this is not where you wanted to be. All the tunnels and stuff were full of leaking chemicals, and they had to go in. This was all before the fire. But when the fire happened, it pretty well destroyed the Ford buildings. There's knocking down the smokestack. So what's left? Not a whole lot is left. Like I said, the one building that they sold before or after the war, that building is still there. It was occupied by Ramsoff in the 80s, who produced industrial dryers, and it's now a machine shop. And one guy that works there, he was coming tonight. I don't know if he made it. Is he here?
It's really not a machine shop. I own
Grinding
the
shop.
plant, and it's we converted grind and some service parts for AK Steel.
Okay. Yeah, they have lots of big grinders.
Yes.
So here's another map, just to show you again. Here, right here's the Ford plant. There's the building that's still there. Right here's the canal and the river, the power plant. We're right there, right now. So we got some pictures. We got to visit the building back in the winter time, so we do have some pictures of inside. You can tell it's definitely a Ford built plant. All the Ford plants were just pretty much the same design. And that's a very warm plant. We were there on a very cold day. We were asking about conditions. It was hot in there, which very much surprised us. There's a picture of when it was Ramsoff making the dryers. So Ford left a pretty big legacy here in Hamilton. Brought a lot of jobs and development into the community. A lot of residents worked at Ford or had family that worked there, and a lot of them are here. Ford spent a lot of money in Hamilton while he was here, and it really, a lot of people have a lot of memories from them being here. So, and that's one thing we did get to find on doing all this. We got to talk to a lot of people, and we learned a lot. And a lot of stuff that didn't wrote down, we heard a lot of it. So we tried to record as much as we can and keep it for the future. I thank you to Ed and Kathy in the Butler County Historical Society, and we also, me and Ed went up to Benson Ford Library and got a lot of information. We do have a lot of newspaper articles, pictures. There's a binder out there where you came in. You're welcome to flip through it. There's lots of information out there. So, yeah. Anybody have any questions?
When Henry Ford and his son started Fordson and Company, there's a little bit that I know about it, was that was the beginning of their dream to have a new Ford Motor Company, that he was having trouble with his stockholders and his board, and he didn't like not having absolute control. But we don't know what happened to that dream, because we know that there was a proposal for this new plant here. What happened to that separate company and his big dreams?
Well, when Henry first started Ford Motor Company, he went bankrupt twice, and he was out of money. He tried again one more time. He had lots of investors, so he could have money. And at that point, they owned him at that. So they were telling him what they wanted him to build. He wanted to build a cheap car that everybody could have. But they said, no, we want a fancy car. So he's trying to keep the prices down. They're trying to raise them up, but he had to listen to them. They owned him. They had, the largest early Ford made was a 6-cylinder Model K, 1906 or 7. And then as he went along and made money, he bought out his investors. So as they went along, he owned more and more, had more say. So at that point, that was the biggest car. They got smaller after that. Dodge Brothers were one of his investors. They were one of the last investors. So Dodge Brothers were still in the Ford Motor Company making Model T parts until 1915, 16, somewhere around there. He finally had enough money to buy them out, and at that point, about 17, he was the owner, full owner of Ford Motor Company. He had enough shares to do what he wanted. 1914, he invented or came up with producing Model Ts on the assembly line, brought costs down. The Model Ks back in '7, they sold for like $2,000 or $3,000 at that time. The cheapest Model T made was $245, something like that. So that was in '25. So yes, he wanted his own company. The tractor plant, I think the tractor division of that was more of his roots of being into the farmlands. And as far as I know, that's what he was doing with the tractors. But he really wanted cheap Model Ts, cheap cars for everybody.
DJ,
Yeah.
are there any employment records around?
Employment records?
Yeah, my grandfather worked there at the time they did wooden spokes.
Oh, yeah.
That's what my father told me.
Might be able to check UAW Local 863. We should have a database there of all our previous
So
employees.
it had to be in the 20s when they were doing wood spokes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that would have been wood spokes in the '20s. My grandpa's
That's
dad
all I
was
know.
there as well.
That's what Dad told me.
Yeah. My grandpa's dad would bring spoke scraps home and burn them. Then they later found out that they could make Kingsford charcoal out of the scraps. So that was another division of Ford scrap. Yeah. I don't know. I would imagine a lot of that was local at the time. Henry would use what was close by. So I'm not for sure who was supplying the main, all the materials, where it was coming in. Yeah, it was coming in by rail, which I don't know if it was coming from Middletown or not, but probably likely. Yeah.
You talked about most of what they made there were stampings. Where did they get their stampings? Do you know that?
They made all that.
They had a stamping plant. Part of it was a stamping plant.
Yeah, they made all their heavy machinery, and they made, I've actually got a newspaper article. Boy Scouts went there in 1936 and walked through, and they described the process that they observed from one end of the plant to the other. And they had all the rollers and the stamps, and everything was right there, just all in line. And
So they made all their tooling and everything right there in that
yeah,
plant?
yeah, the first part of the factory when they would come in was part of the tool room. Yeah.
On the Model A, you always get any color as long as it's black. But what about the wheels? Was there different color wheels you could?
On Model T's, wheels were all black.
They were all black.
All Model T wheels are black from the factory. The dealers would do a lot of the painting. Model A wheels, they did have colors, so you could get different colors.
Okay.
But
A lot of different colors or just red and white?
now, there's about maybe 5, 10 colors. Yeah, they had a few. And Model Ts were all black between 1913 and 1926. The early cars, 9s were red, 10s were green, 11, 12, and 13 was blue. You only got one choice, but they did have
Oh,
colors.
okay.
Then they went to black.
Yeah.
And then in 26, you got a choice of colors. Most were black. And then in 27, I had read somewhere they quit making black Model Ts at that point. I don't know if that was ever true. Most of them still were black. And then also a lot of the paint was lacquer paint, and it would turn black So you may have a red Model T, but it would be a darker red after a few years. But most of the colors they use anyhow are a dark color, greens and browns and stuff. They did have orange wheels on Model A's. That was part of their color combination. So they were trying to improve. They almost went bankrupt again and making Model Ts since they made them forever at that point. Everybody was tired of Model Ts. They were everywhere, and they just wanted something different. So that's when the Model A came about. That was a whole new improvement. Yeah.
My dad always told it down there at that Miami Motor Car Company, they would stock the bodies of the cars, and if you wanted say a sedan, they didn't have any, they'd take a coupe upstairs, and within about a half hour, they'd bring the sedan down.
Yeah. Yeah. Model Ts are pretty simple. You could do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had never heard that they'd done that, but I believe that. That was a huge dealership.
I think it was the Model A that he went there, he wanted, and took it up. They got a big elevator in there. And,
Yeah, the elevator's still there.
And took it upstairs, and he come back in a half hour, and there was his car.
Maybe that's why Etzel was so impressed.
Yeah.
Being there. Yeah, that's pretty neat. Anybody else? Well, you're welcome to look at all the stuff. There's so many people here. I didn't walk around and point out everything, but look at the back side of this blue wheel. It says Hamilton on it. In the display case with the running board, I believe there's a door latch in there. Says Hamilton on it. Or it may be the one in the next case. Those are the Model 8 door latches they were making. They just made so many parts. Yeah.
Model T story, my grandmother, who was born in 1903, when she got married, they took the Model T to Niagara Falls for a honeymoon,
Yeah.
and then back down through Pennsylvania and back home in a Model T.
Yeah. 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 People back then really did travel. We don't think of that, but even before cars, people got around, and I don't know how. They were used to it. That's all they knew. But we had family lived here in Hamilton. They had a Model T. I got pictures of them in their Model T. They would drive up to Russell's Point, up by Salina. On the other side of Salina, they'd drive up there. They rent a little cabin. And they'd go to Kentucky, to High Bridge, Kentucky, and hang over the bridge. And they had a camera, so they took pictures of all that. So, but they drove their Model T everywhere, and they traded it in for a Star. Yeah.
I know you're a Model T collector, but do you have any affiliation with anybody that collects the old Fords and tractors and clubs of that nature?
I don't know if there is any Fords and clubs exactly.
I found a couple on the net, that's why I asked.
Yeah, I'm not affiliated with any of the Fortson groups. There's a couple of them at the Model T Museum up in Richmond. I know they have one that's up there. I believe it's a 1918, somewhere around there. It's an early one. But they made them pretty primitive at the beginning, and they changed them. But they've got some up there. And in Portland, Indiana, they featured Fortson tractors here a couple years ago. They were everywhere. There's lots of videos online of different ways they use Fortsons. There's some with tubes on them to go through snow. They use them for everything. They use Model Ts for everything as well. Yeah.
Are we going to get a Model T convention here in a couple of years? Is that true?
We're working on it.
Working on it? Working on it hard.
Yeah, we're working on it.
Good.
We're trying to. We're waiting on everybody to agree.
Yep. All right.
Any other questions? Thank you guys for coming. If you have any more questions, come on up.